I'm sorry to have to say this, but a lot of players in ranked Marvel Rivals matches don't know they're playing the game wrong, and they don't even realize they could be doing way better, and more importantly, they don't realize they could be having way more fun and experiencing less frustration. But that's okay, that's why we have this guide. I'm going to give you important tips about how to choose your main heroes properly, how to play your roles effectively, and I'll explain how the meta doesn't actually matter to you at all. I know that sounds crazy, but bear with me just for a moment. And just to be clear, this video is a chill guide where we cover big tips over some gameplay. This is not one of those rage bait videos or anything like that, and any, toxicity in the comments will not be tolerated whatsoever. Okay, so what if I told you that the meta, aka the hyper-optimized min-max way of playing the game, doesn't actually matter in Marvel Rivals matchmaking? Well, maybe you'd call me crazy, but it's true, it's 100% true. First of all, games don't even have fully developed metas right after launch, but even with that aside, the long-term meta still doesn't really matter to the vast majority of people. What a lot of players don't understand is that these metas and these tier lists you hear about are only valid for players and teams that can actually maximize the effectiveness of those strategies or heroes. You have to play them at 100% 24/7. So naturally, this only applies to the highest skill level players with fully coordinated teams that anticipate these strategies, moves, or heroes. Now, if you don't believe me, well, think about any top tier hero you might have heard about or strategy, then think about how often you've seen that fail in regular matchmaking when quote unquote it should have worked. You've probably seen that happen many times already, and if you haven't, you just haven't played enough, and we'll see that happen many times over. The reality here is that some random dudes in Bronze 2 are not going to be able to do what Grandmasters can with a fully coordinated team. The game is played differently at every level, both in terms of individual skill and overall team performance or strategy. Like with any competitive game, many high skill strategies will simply never work in lower skill lobbies. And I'm not saying you can't learn from the best players. Of course you can, there's lots to learn from them. I'm just saying, the so-called meta isn't actually the best way to play the game as a regular person, especially if you're solo queuing or don't have a full stack in general. It's just gonna suck the soul out of the experience for you, and you'll just be mad when you've seen something working for others, but it doesn't work for you. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that whenever you see these absolutely mind-blowing, incredible clips online, that is coming from less than 1% of players and less than 0.1% of the overall total experience. What you're seeing are highlight reels. They're not the moment-to-moment match experience. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that the meta doesn't apply across the board. It applies to a very small section of the game experience. So I don't want you chasing it. I don't want you kind of pining for it. I don't want you feeling sad when it doesn't work out, because it simply does not apply to 99% of the players. Now then, many people who want to get more serious in ranked play in Marvel Rivals, they'll look up tier lists and go from there. This happens in every competitive video game, but it's not a good way to figure out which heroes you should play as. The truth is, there are four basic factors you need. The truth is, there's about 4 basic factors you should consider when looking at who you should play as. The truth is, there's about 4 factors you should consider when looking at who you should play. Number 1, do you have fun with the hero? Start by trying them out in the practice arena, go to quick match. If you need more guidance, you can check out my guides or somebody else's guides, that kind of thing, but try them out for yourself first. Number 2, do you already play well with that hero, or do you at least feel like you can see yourself playing well with them in the future? Please be honest and reasonable with yourself. Number 3, are the hero's abilities decent enough to help the team a majority of the time, even if you're not like a pro, even if you're not getting those MVPs? Is the hero you're playing as actually contributing to the team with the level that you're playing them at? And number 4, can you be consistent with this hero? Let's take Squirrel Girl here as an example, which is really difficult for me to say, and oh god, I'm gonna have to say her name a lot. So some place her at S tier and some place her at C tier. Those extremes alone should tell you that people tiering her, they don't really have a proper understanding of the game yet. If somebody's saying this is the best character ever or the worst character ever, truth is probably somewhere in between, right? Well, Squirrel Girl, oh my god, it's so hard to say, is one of the easiest characters to play in the game, as long as you have a decent aim and okay self-preservation instincts. Because of her ease of use, you can be highly consistent with her, and thanks to her solid stats and backline eliminating playstyle, she can be useful in almost any team composition. So as long as you play her decently, she's a great hero. You should totally just forget about the tier lists fighting over how to label her. Who cares if people say she's S, A, C, or D, or whatever? If you're playing her decently and she's contributing to the team, the tier list does not matter whatsoever. So when you're trying to figure out which heroes to play as, focus on the easy execution heroes at first to get a feel for things. Just because they're easy to play does not mean that they're bad. Let me give you a practical example here. So in this gold match we've been looking at, right? Let's focus at Star-Lord and myself. Star-Lord is considered an S tier character by many at this point in time, but you'll notice my end product with Star-Lord is very similar, or potentially even better depending on how you look at it. Star-Lord here got 37 eliminations and I got 30, so at first it might seem like, oh, he outplayed me by quite a bit. However, notice I was only eliminated twice compared to his 10 times. I was arguably more useful for longer periods of time. Again, arguably. One thing you cannot argue though is that I do have 5 assists. So overall, my elimination contribution is 35 to his 37, but I have way less unalives. And don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking Star-Lord here at all. This was a great team effort and he was great in many team fights. I'm just highlighting the fact that you don't have to chase tier list standards. And if we keep digging deeper here, we can see that Star-Lord only got 2 more final hits than me and outdamaged me by only about 1.5k. So naturally the question comes up, who was the better player and who actually contributed more to the team? Well, that's a trick question because we both did great in different ways. I sustained damage over time and helped control space. He did great bursts of damage and quickly altered fights in our favor. We both did well, and yeah, of course, it would have been better if Star-Lord was alive for longer so he could slay further, but also his playstyle makes him more prone to getting yeeted than Squirrel Girl. Plus, at the end of the day, the team won with its different factors, and that's all that matters if you're looking to chase those W's. Anyway, I say all of this to drive home the points I was making earlier. If you follow the 4 steps I mentioned, you'll have way more fun with this game and perform better at the same time. It's honestly just that simple. And again, if you want to look up more tips or need more guidance around the heroes you're playing as, you can always check out my guides, they're on my channel. Now then, you might have heard that strategists or supports and healers can get a lot of eliminations in Marvel Rivals, and that's true in a way. In this game, generally, you have several objectives you should aim for depending on the role that you're playing as. But when you're playing as a strategist, you 100% need to focus on healing or buffing your Vanguard tanks like Doctor Strange or Groot as much as possible. Think of this as your first and primary objective. If you can help maintain your tanks, this will lead the front line that enables Duelist DPS heroes to get lots of eliminations. And your secondary objective is to heal and buff everyone else when possible. And then your third objective is to support the team by getting some eliminations here and there whenever the situation allows for some easy picks or just, situation calls for a little bit of extra damage. As a support player, you don't really have the stats to dominate matches in terms of eliminations, so if you get 10 of them at the end of a match but barely did any healing, you didn't really actually help the team. Remember, you need to focus on Vanguard tanks, then everyone else, then damage if applicable. Now let's talk about Duelist DPS style heroes. They also have several objectives to work towards. The first and most important one for them is to get as many eliminations as possible. Within that first objective is a branching sub-objective though. You need to choose who your primary targets will be, support players or other DPS players. This is situational and can vary from match to match depending on what's going on within that match, but if you have the opportunity, you should always take out supports first. Having no supports is the quickest way to lose a match, so whenever you can, try to take out the enemy team's backline. Your secondary objective is to protect your own supports. Many heroes like to flank or attack from behind, so pay attention to the team composition of the opposing side and pay attention to other DPS players and where they're moving around on the map. You absolutely need to make sure your supports aren't getting eliminated constantly. And some people say this is the tank's job, but tanks are slow moving. They cannot get back in time to help out their supports if their supports are getting backlined or flanked. But anyway, your third objective as a Duelist DPS is to push back the opposing team's front line, which you'll naturally get from playing your primary objective. However, sometimes it's just not possible because the other team plays too well or maybe due to specific matchups. In these cases, you can brute force it by focusing fire on the enemy tanks. Yeah, they have a lot of HP and they'll be getting healing or buffs, but if 2 duelists can focus on a tank for just a few seconds, you'll force them to retreat at worst or eliminate them at best. Now let's talk about Vanguard tank heroes, and their first objective is to be a tactical meat shield for your team, which kind of sounds silly, but it's true. You want to be constantly soaking up damage and attention from the other team, because if the enemy team is wasting their fire on you and their precious attention, That means your duelists and strategists are free to do their objectives. Your secondary objective is to maintain your front line and push the other team backwards over time, but your third objective is something you kind of naturally get from objective 1 and 2, and that is to get whatever eliminations you can during all of the frontline chaos that you're constantly engaged in. Vanguard heroes operate in the most hectic spaces in Marvel Rivals, and I just want to point out very explicitly that the team roles in this game are absolutely symbiotic. They rely on each other, they work with each other, they need to have that relationship. For example, you can't be an effective tank without good healing, you can't be an effective support without protection, and you can't be an effective duelist without tanks soaking up damage and attention. Alright, today we covered a lot of ground, but the main takeaways I want you to have are this. Number 1, focus on your role objectives. Number 2, play characters that are a mixture of fun and good performance relative to your own skills. Number 3, pro metas don't apply to you. And really, by following these simple ideas, you'll be having way more fun and you'll be climbing the ranks faster. That's truly, honestly, all there is to it. And if you want some more tips, if you want some more help, if you want some specific hero guides, be sure to check out the other Rivals videos on my channel. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.